Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping into a journey with a pretty unique source. We're aiming to unpack some information, maybe find some surprising connections. It's definitely about looking at global events through a different lens. So our material today, it's from excerpts of a satirical news script. It's called Today in Satire, August 9, 2025, from something named editorialcartoons.ai NewsHour.
No.
And the source itself says it blends global chaos with questionable humor. It even describes its host as armed with facts, sarcasm, and a coffee strong enough to power a small submarine. So yeah, not your typical news.
No, definitely not. And our mission here really is to pull out the insights from this satirical view. What's interesting about this specific source, this editorialcartoons.ai NewsHour, is how it seems to compress all this global complexity, maybe using algorithms, into these sharp, sometimes uncomfortable observations, finding connections a human might miss. It's about seeing what this satirical method reveals, things we might miss otherwise.
Okay, let's dive into this news blender then, as they call it. See what it stirs up. First up is geopolitics, standoffs, and diplomacy. Starting with Ukraine. The script really flags Zelensky's very firm and no-concession stance. Ukraine wants all its land, even if peace talks become, and this is vivid, a staring contest in Alaska.
Okay.
And then it immediately pivots, points out an upcoming Trump-Putin summit. With that quip, somewhere in the Kremlin, a map of Ukraine just started sweating. What does that image tell us? About the stakes, I mean.
Well, it really distills the core tension, doesn't it? You've got Ukraine's hardline bumping right up against this volatile superpower diplomacy. That sweating map, it's more than just a joke. It's like a shorthand for how personal and, frankly, unpredictable these big global meetings feel, especially for those directly impacted.
So moving from that immediate tension, let's look broader. The source brings up the 80th anniversary of the Nagasaki bombing, a moment usually marked by calls for nuclear disarmament. But the satire hits right after. World leaders nodded solemnly, then returned to arguing about who gets to park their nukes closest to the front door.
Yeah, that part really nails the enduring hypocrisy, you could say. You have this solemn remembrance right next to the usual strategic games. The insight there is pretty clear. These global calls for disarmament, they often feel a bit hollow when you look at the actual power dynamics. It's kind of unsettling how easily that joke lands. It speaks to a real cynicism out there.
It really does. That feels like the power of this kind of satire, tapping into that gap between the diplomatic show and the reality. Okay, staying with diplomacy but shifting a bit. Moscow warning about shadowy forces trying to sink the Trump-Putin meeting, described as titanic efforts. And the source naturally couldn't resist the analogy, saying, like the Titanic, this meeting could hit an iceberg made of mutual distrust and bad hors d'oeuvre.
Right. And that immediately flags how fragile these big meetings are. The Titanic thing is funny, sure, but it also gets across that feeling of inherent risk. Potential for total failure, driven by things like, deep distrust. It's a sharp reminder of how easily these things can just fall apart.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, from those big summit dances, let's look at something else the source picked up. Conflicts that just seem to, grind on. It mentions 2 Indian soldiers killed in Kashmir, Operation Akal on day 9, and then adds, at this point, the ceasefire calendar in South Asia is just blank pages and wishful thinking.
Oof, that's stark. It lays bare the brutal reality of these long-running conflicts, the human cost. And that line about the ceasefire calendar, it speaks directly to how intractable some disputes feel, like cycles of violence just keep breaking any attempt at peace. There's a real weariness in that observation.
Okay, shifting gears a bit now. Intelligence, immigration, global exchanges. The source talks about Iran arresting 20 alleged Israeli Mossad operatives as a warning. But then the punchline, some got released, which, quote, either means they weren't spies or they were really good spies.
Yeah, that one pokes right at the murky world of intelligence, doesn't it? The ambiguity. It challenges the official story, basically suggesting the truth is probably way more complicated, maybe even contradictory. Leaves you wondering what really happened.
Right. Over in Europe, Portugal's top court struck down an immigration restriction because of family reunification rules. And the script quips politicians were shocked because apparently grandma isn't a security threat, didn't make it into their policy drafts.
Well, that highlights a common tension, right? Balancing security stuff with basic human rights, like family unity. A satire points out how easily the human side of things, like family, can get lost in the policy jargon. And then, reality hits back through the courts, forces a rethink.
And then on education. India launching U.S. education fairs to boost student exchange. The script translates this into Diplomatic code for, we'll trade you engineers for green cards.
That's brilliant. It just cuts through all the formal language, doesn't it? Gets right to the underlying economic and migration motives. It highlights that these exchanges, while framed as cultural, often have a very practical, transactional side, especially when it comes to skilled workers and immigration.
Okay, let's turn to the global economy now, and a bit of social commentary. The source mentions Chinese companies flooding the U.S. stock market despite political tensions. And Wall Street's apparently thrilled because, as the source says, ironically, nothing says free market like buying into a company whose government you just sanctioned last week.
That observation really hits on a major paradox in global economics today. You've got money flowing freely, markets pulling things together, even while governments are squaring off politically. It shows how economic interests can kind of operate on their own track, separate from geopolitics, or at least alongside it. It's complex. Money talks, I guess.
Seems like it. Now, for something maybe a bit lighter, London's T100 World Tour Triathlon started. Closed streets. And the source jokes it turned commuters into Olympic-level complainers.
Right. And sometimes it's those small things. It reminds us that amidst all the big global news, everyday life gets disrupted too. Things like traffic jams, they become these little points of shared frustration that kind of grounds the big picture with a touch of local reality.
Oh, I can definitely relate to that one. We've all been there.
Exactly. A reminder that those immediate impacts, they matter too. They connect us in, well, sometimes in exasperation.
True. Okay, finally. The source notes the world marking Indigenous Peoples Day, celebrations, speeches, hashtags, but then delivers a sharp critique, saying it was celebrated while quietly ignoring the part about actually protecting their land.
Yeah. That's a powerful piece of social commentary. It points right at the gap we often see between symbolic gestures and real action, especially concerning Indigenous rights and land. The satire highlights how easy it is to say the right things without tackling the deep systemic issues that don't just go away.
So as you're listening and thinking about all these different pieces, consider how this satirical view helps maybe shine a light on those underlying tensions, the ironies, the problems that just keep popping up.
Yeah, it's definitely a unique way to process news. It can help you sort of quickly grasp the core issues, but thoroughly too, by drawing out those unspoken things you might not get from a straight report.
What a ride through that news blender. It really was, like it said, a mix of the tragic, absurd, and wait, did that really happen? This source definitely gave a different angle on just one day's headlines, distilled things down into these memorable, sometimes uncomfortable takeaways.
Absolutely. And I think this deep dive showed how that satirical frame can actually uncover really significant points, surprising insights even. It highlights these important dynamics, global issues that keep coming back, international relations, human rights, economic weirdness.
But does it ever worry you, though, that this kind of really sharp satire might, I don't know, oversimplify things, or even make light of stuff that's genuinely serious just for a punchline?
That's a really fair point. There's always that risk, isn't there? Oversimplification or trivializing. But I'd argue that by hitting those absurdities and contradictions so head-on, satire can sometimes cut through the usual noise. It can force us to look at uncomfortable truths more directly than, say, a dry analysis might. It's just a different way to get to understanding. And often it sticks with you because of that slightly uncomfortable humor.
Well, like the source itself wrapped up. Remember, if the world feels like a circus, at least we've got front row seats. So maybe that's the final thought for you listening. How does looking at the world through different lenses, even a satirical one like this, deepen your understanding? Does it prompt new questions about the stories we tell ourselves about what's happening? What really stood out to you about how these events were presented today? And how might that shift your perspective, even just a little?